This was a long, slow process. It took a lot of perseverance on her part and the part of others in the community. But we can do this here in Santa Fe. We can do it in every county in New Mexico. But we kind of need to know how that gets done. And that's why Kathleen is here, is to tell us how it was done in Mora and some of the background information about that. So please welcome Kathleen.
Well, good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you, John, for the introduction. I just wanted to explain a little bit about the hats that I wear, and I'll be going back and forth between wearing one hat and another, and hopefully I'll remember to let you know which hat I'm wearing when I'm shifting positions. And John was right. It was 5.5 years since the oil industry came into Mora County, and when we organized our first community grassroots group. And we've had the luxury of 5.5 years. Today, I think it's sped up so that we don't have that kind of luxury of time anymore. After the passage of the Community Rights Ordinance in the city of Las Vegas last year, we formed a statewide organizing group called the New Mexico Coalition for Community Rights, with the help of the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, and I'll refer to them either as the Legal Defense Fund or CELDF, or I'll probably use those two acronyms, and they're one and the same. I might say CELDF, whichever my tongue can get around the quickest at the time. But they were responsible for helping the city of Las Vegas getting their first, the first community rights ordinance passed in New Mexico, and the first west of Ohio. So we formed a board, and I'm the chair of that board, and so what we're doing now is working as kind of the vessel, the platform, so that other communities from across the state of New Mexico, as they start organizing on a local level, we can assist them and help them, kind of sharing some of our experiences. And then I was honored last year in November, so it's very recent, to become a staff member of CELDF as the organizer for New Mexico. So that's been quite a bottoms-up kind of involvement. And so I'll be kind of flip-flopping, wearing those different hats. And who is CELDF? The Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund has been in operation now for about 18 years, 17, 18 years, and they're a non-profit environmental group, law firm out of Pennsylvania. And when communities are under threats of various things, whether it is a money threat on the local level, or if it is hydraulic fracturing, fracking, and drilling, or if it's factory farms, or whatever the threat is, when they come up against the wall and they realize that they have no more options, they're the ones that knock on the door, ring their doorbell, give them a call, and it's at that point that they start conversation and dialogue with the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. And that's what happened with us in Mora County. So they assist communities who contact them. They do not solicit communities. So some people are under the impression that as outsiders they come in and they force their agenda upon a community, and that is not correct. So we were wholeheartedly welcoming all of their advice, because we had come up against a brick wall, and it was so tall, and it was so wide, and there was no way around. So basically what they do is they assist communities to make non-regulatory law, and that's framed, it's written, it's drafted, it's all put together by the community so that it's a reflection of what is going on in that community. And what they do as well is they come in and they help assist communities by teaching what are called democracy schools. And those came about back originating in Pennsylvania, and it was based upon Daniel Pennock and his family. Daniel Pennock was a young boy who was walking home from school, and he was going across some agricultural land, which was a typical walkway for him. It had just recently been spread with sewage sludge. He died. His family set up a fund and through CELDF, and that was the beginning of the democracy schools. It's how do we protect our children within our own communities from corporate threats, when in fact we are told through state laws, through the regulatory structure of law, that we cannot stop this kind of devastation, this kind of destruction, this kind of death, this mortality. So the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund will teach community democracy schools within a community once a community has organized. And what they do is they create this school that gives them historical understanding from the time of Britain, the British Empire, and then the Revolution, and all the way through to today, to explain how it is that we got to a place where we are under the thumb of a plutocracy, and how in the world could we have gone to sleep for that long in our lifetimes to have not even seen those steps that have taken us into such numbness and such control and such a void of freedom within our own communities, where our environment is so devastated, so ravaged, that that we now have cancer of 1 in 2 people, and our bodies now on average are the homes of over 700 toxic chemicals. How could we possibly have found ourselves to be here? And to also know that the ice caps are melting and the Matterhorn, the rock is falling, and the climbers aren't safe to be on the Matterhorn. How could we possibly find ourselves here? When we, in fact, are all very conscious and very concerned and working as hard as we possibly can and running as quickly as we can to do everything to stop all of this destruction and devastation. So, community rights ordinances, what in fact are they, and why? And so, of course, that's an obvious statement, and the answer is very clear. It's the corporate threats. It's the state corporate takeover of our world. And so what we came to find out in Mora County was that we were really faced with a democracy problem. It wasn't so much that it was our specific corporate threat, but that we didn't actually have the right within our own local community to determine what the future or the present moment was going to be in Mora County. And when we came upon that realization, everything changed. Because initially, when we started organizing as our grassroots and our educational program over the years, we thought as long as we got a grasp of law, as long as we started to really understand what was going on, then we could turn the tides. We could really then be effective. But we kept coming up against, no, you can't do that. No, you can't stop them from coming into your county. No, you don't have a right to go against the existing law. No, you don't have a seat at the table. It was this constant unempowering response. And at one point in time, we finally realized that there had to be another way. We knew in our guts that there was, but we figured there had to be another way. We just didn't know which way it was. And I found the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund by happenstance and called them. And that was the day the light bulb went on. That was the day the sun shone. That was the day hope entered into my heart. And my gut started settling down. And the terror and the fear started to reside. And I realized that this was about not just an external empowerment, but it was an internal self-empowerment. That this was about understanding that we are the 99%. We are the voice. We are the power. But if we don't recognize we are, then we won't be able to take it forward. And so that day was one of the most memorable days, and I think back very fondly of it because the amount of terror and the amount of fear that just kept riveting throughout my sense of self was huge. Since that point, we've held 4 democracy schools in New Mexico. The first happened in Wagon Mound, and this was in 2010. And that particular democracy school, where the teaching, the understanding of what our rights are, did not lead to passage of a community rights ordinance. The second democracy school was in Albuquerque in 2012. And that democracy school was in Mora County. And that democracy school resulted in factions of the community coming together at the table. Community groups that wouldn't ever sit down at the same table in the past, but they understood that the threat was so huge that they came together, and they all understood that it was about family, it was about a sustainable future. And as long as everyone kept their eye on that prize, there could be a willingness and a common goal and a means to that common goal. Immediately following the democracy school that Thomas Lindsay and Ben Price of CELDF presented that day, we formed into the Mora Democracy School Committee. And there were 14 people. We stayed on that committee meeting once a week, Monday nights, from 6 until who knows when. Sometimes they were very lively, and sometimes they lasted much longer than others. In 3 months' time, we had a fully vetted community rights ordinance with the help of CELDF. And yes, it was very exciting. And the most important thing that we found was we were all on the same page. We all understood what the threat was. We all wanted to keep drilling and fracking from Mora County. Getting to that place was very important. It was one of the most important aspects, because we also understood in order for the community rights ordinance to be legally defensible by CELDF, we had to deal with one corporate threat in each community rights ordinance. So even though we wanted to put everything in, plus the kitchen sink, I mean, we were concerned about GMOs, we were concerned about, water withdrawal. I mean, we were concerned about so many things that so many other communities were concerned about. But we had to keep it to one. So we picked the one that felt the most fear-inducing, and the one that we felt our community could get behind. We had a history in Mora County in 1994 when the development guidance system and the comprehensive land use plan was put into place. And under that, any development that came into Mora County was considered a prohibited use. So that wasn't quite enough to deal with Royal Dutch Shell. So we knew we had to do a little bit more work. But we also knew at that time in 1994 that the people's desire to protect Mora County was a huge majority. And we didn't think that that had changed very much. In fact, there were 2 commission elections that happened between 2010 and 2012. In both cases, the new commissioners beat out incumbents, and both incumbents were pro-drilling. So we knew that, again, we had the majority, and the majority continued to speak. So there we were as unified as a county could get. We had a unified threat, we had a unified ordinance, and we had the majority of people behind us. So we could go forward with that. Unfortunately, we did not have the majority on our commission. So we did have to wait for the second election to get the next commissioner in, which was Alfonso Griego, and the sponsor of our community rights ordinance is the current chair of our commission, John Olivas. And yes, and they do deserve a round of applause. As you can imagine, to pass a community rights ordinance when you are needing funds for your county puts a huge pressure on the officials. And also, thank you for the water, Jeff. And also, when you're facing the largest corporations in the world, with the most money and the most power, and here we are, this rural community, 5,200 people on 1,944 square miles, and people think we're all, we're out there and we're rural and we're all hicks, and we are to some degree, and we like it. And some people are more than that, and there are a lot of PhDs that I found out in Mora County, and there's a lot of very well-educated people, and so it's not quite as I don't know the word, bland.
Homogeneous.
Yes, homogeneous as you might think. But Mora County has always, from what I have heard from the people there, has always appreciated and always loved their culture. And the children are very, very dear to them. In fact, a woman today was telling me about one of the plays that was done through a Santa Fe director, and that there were 500 or 600 people who showed up in the auditorium that evening in Mora County, and the only way you can get that in Mora County is if your child is on stage or Royal Dutch Shell is there threatening your child's future. So so people are very much intact with their roots, with their ancestors. The acequias are very well maintained. People still live on the land, even though we're in 2013. People still have this belief of being land-based, or understanding and connection with being land-based. The interesting thing about living in Mora County too is that the people have never had a corporate development in Mora County, so their relationship to water and the land is again one that they feel very strongly about. So what we found out was that in our educational work that we were opening the eyes of the people to the nature of the problem, and that the people were being denied the fundamental right to self-government, and that the Constitution gave more rights to corporations than to people. And so what we found with our community rights ordinance and instigating that was that we knew that we were going to be very unpopular with the state. In fact, we knew we were going to be unpopular with also the federal government. We knew we were going to be unpopular with people who were pro-drilling. And we knew we were going to be unpopular with environmental groups who were pro-regulatory. But with a commission who understood all those things, and the people who worked to get this community rights ordinance in place, we were willing to take that step forward. And fortunately, we had commissioners with the kind of integrity that they could hold on to the prize and understand that this wasn't about us. This was about the future. Now, there's some really crazy things in our laws today. The way the state relates to municipal corporations or counties is that it was an interpretation in 1819 by Judge Dillon, and that ruling was based upon the interpretation that counties or municipal corporations are just an extension of an arm of the state, and that counties actually do not have any rights. In fact, they can be dissolved. All they are is an arm to be able to enact state law. So what Mora County has done, in essence, has gone against Dillon's rule, has gone against the state, has said, we believe we have the right to self-government. We believe that we're acting based upon our inalienable rights to clean water, to our health, to our children's future, and to a sustainable future. And so by stepping out and saying, actually using the very mechanisms that are legally in place, number one, state statute allows any county or municipality of any kind to pass ordinances. And so we followed state statute and actually did pass it through a legal channel. And the second thing that we did was, based upon the New Mexico State Constitution, Article 2, we also understood that we had the power vested in the people and that we could in fact change this direction. And so we were very empowered in a legal way. We were empowered like other movements were empowered, such as the suffragist movement or the abolitionist movement, when the Constitution itself supports and gives more rights to others and not to, and there isn't an equal representation across the board, then we actually have the right to challenge the Constitution. And so again, we were energized and empowered through the Democracy School to understand these principles and realize that we could join in with the other movements and we could take this forward. And so that's really what has happened in Mora County, is that the people have felt assured, they have felt empowered, they have understood the injustices of the Constitution. And if you go through a democracy school or you have the fortune to have studied history in this manner, you understand that the Constitution is a living law and that it is not something cast in stone, but in fact it was written by privileged white men who were property owners, and it excluded women, and it excluded people of color, and it excluded anybody who was not someone who had been given titles and handed this privilege to them. So it was a very exclusive group who decided just what kind of rights we were going to have and what kind of rights corporations were going to have. And so that document that goes back so long in history is still what determines our rights today. And so here we are, these very conscious people, knowing what is unjust, knowing what is happening to our world, understanding the devastation and the concerns about climate change, understanding the destruction of species on a daily basis. And all we have in front of us or between us, this impediment, is understanding that we actually have the right and that it's just about empowerment, and that if we can do this on the local level, like we've seen in Las Vegas and now in Mora County, it is possible everywhere. In fact, there are over 150 other communities across the country who have passed such ordinances. There are over a couple of dozen, including the city of Pittsburgh, who's the largest city in the country to pass a community rights ordinance banning fracking. So we have encouragement, and we also are seeing that the courts are changing today. Just recently, a judge in Pennsylvania, Odell Seneca, I believe her name is, ruled for the first time in a very long time that corporations are not persons. And yes, I mean, this is a fundamental difference in the rulings of the courts. And this ruling demanded that the corporation, Resource Range, open their documents that were settled out of court, and it revealed that they paid a family $750,000 for polluting their water through the fracking process. So we just, in my mind, I wonder how many other such documents are there out there that are still protected under corporate personhood. So what we know here, along with also another recent ruling with the two communities in New York, that the appellate court ruled in their favor to continue to uphold the ban of fracking and drilling. So what we're seeing is a shift in the interpretation and the understanding of just what corporations perhaps deserve, or the damage that corporations are doing, not just on the local level, but just around the world, globally, universally. And so people have said, well, you could get sued. And as John Oliva said, I'd rather get sued and taken to court for protecting our water than through the regulatory structure of law, letting industry in and then having our water polluted and depleted. And then the citizens, each individually, having to take these leviathans to court and trying to gain anything other than total financial devastation. So we are at a time when we really are coming to a very big crescendo, and we're seeing that this kind of corporate threat is global, and it's not just fracking, and communities are understanding that there is something huge going on, and I think there was a really interesting book that I've just started reading, and it's by Paul Hawken, and many of you might have read this book. I just picked it up, but it was written in 2007. It's called Blessed Unrest, and in there he's actually at the end saying that this is very hopeful what he's seeing. But it's called Blessed Unrest. He says the subtitle is How the Largest Social Movement in History is Restoring Grace, Justice, and Beauty to the World. And I see that. I see that as we walk in grace, as we walk with our understanding of what we are doing, what our duty is, what our moral code is telling us is just and correct, that we walk in grace and we walk in beauty, and that we are the voice for nature, and that we are the voice for the children. And that perhaps all these years for myself, when I have not been involved and been asleep as all of this devastation has descended, now it's my opportunity and my opportunity to really become involved and really look at what matters for me in terms of handing something over to the children. And one of the lines in his book was, "We're feeling this instinctive collective response to threat." And I think that's really what it came down to. When the corporations came into Mora County and wanted to drill, it was an instinctive threat to my being. And I think, as he's saying, that's what we're all resonating with, is that it's not just a NIMBY situation, as industry likes to cavalierly throw out at us. This isn't about your backyard or my backyard. This is about the entire species, human, animal, insect. It's about life itself. And I think that as we start to see the whole global unification, and we see that with Occupy, we see that with Arab Spring, we see that everywhere. We see it in Greece. We see what's happening, and if we look at how we can, certainly I think the title of David Hawkins' book certainly inspires me. And before going to questions, and please ask any specifics, I'm happy to respond. I wanted to just read a couple quotes from his book because they really resonated strongly. One is, "There is vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there is only one of you in all time, this expression is unique. You have to keep open and aware directly to the urges that motivate you. Keep the channel open. There is no satisfaction whatever at any time. There's only a queer, divine dissatisfaction, a blessed unrest that keeps us marching and makes us more alive than the others." And this is Martha Graham to Agnes DeMille. And then, "How is one to live a moral and compassionate existence when one is fully aware of the blood, the horror inherent in life? When one finds darkness not only in one's culture, but within oneself? If there is a stage at which an individual life becomes truly adult, it must be when one grasps the irony in its unfolding and accepts responsibility for a life lived in the midst of such paradox. One must live in the middle of contradiction, because if all contradictions were eliminated at once, life would collapse. There are simply no answers to some of the great pressing questions. You continue to live them out, making your life a worthy expression of leaning into the light. That's Barry Lopez from Arctic Dreams.
You have a sign-up sheet, isn't that correct?
Yes.
Cool.
Oh.
Let me get that started. And then if anybody has questions, to follow up, if you want to know